Hello and welcome to Better Under Pressure. I'm Sara Milne Rowe, author of The Shed Method and founder of Coaching Impact. And in this podcast, I talk to leaders from all walks of life about being better under pressure and using pressure for better. I want to explore how we handle pressure in a world that is becoming more and more complex, the impact that pressure has on our ability to perform at our best, and what we do to be better under pressure.
As a fresh-faced early 20-something, I was going for this job at one of the biggest high street banks. I'd been given a brief. I was told to come in and present a marketing strategy and plan for how I would increase revenue at a local tourism venue. So I was talking to my parents about it, Googled a few different things, did a bit of research, and I thought, well, hang on a minute. They were expecting a presentation. It was on the 37th floor in one of the high-rise towers in Canary Wharf. And I thought, how can I do this differently? Because I do believe in difference and actually that difference being so valuable. I went to the local charity shop and I bought a board game which had a number of different characters on it. It had a river running down it and it was almost like snakes and ladders. And I used that board game to articulate what the marketing strategy would be. You could get additional customers rather than just using the tube. They could come on this river and I had little animated characters that were on the thing. I walked in, everyone's suited and booted. They're like, oh, would you like to connect your laptop to the screen to present? I said, oh, no, I don't need that. Got out of my bag my board game, opened the box, put the board game out, and they were just sitting there, their drawers dropped to the floor, like, what is this woman about to do? And I presented the entire presentation about the marketing strategy using the board game.
Welcome to Mollie Pearse, Part 2. With her work as Meta's head of marketing for EMEA, her training as an ultra athlete, as well as trying for a family, Mollie has a pretty full-time relationship with pressure. And that's why I decided we needed 2 episodes to fully explore how she's learnt to be better under pressure. If you missed the first conversation, do please find a time to listen. You won't regret it. In the second conversation, Mollie shares why she had to drop out of a 24-hour endurance race 2/3 of the way through despite being superbly fit, what she does to grow a sense of belonging with those that she works with, and how she got on at the interview where she played her game. Mollie, thank you so much for coming and talking to me about pressure. I'm really excited about this conversation because, you and I have spoken before, but I know that pressure is a dance between many different areas of your life. And that's what's going to, I think, so enriching to hear and for us to talk more about. But when has actually pressure beaten you?
Such an important topic, I think, because, pressure can be such a valuable concept and piece of evidence in your life. But at the same time, you have to acknowledge that it's there in order to deal with it. Otherwise, it can definitely take over. And I think for me, I do a huge amount of endurance sport, running, swimming, cycling, combined, separate. And it was a few years ago, I trained for an event called the Bob Graham, which is, in fact, I still have the map above my desktop here in my office because it's a very poignant moment in my life, but also it's a very big challenge. So it's 24-hour race, 42 fells across 110 kilometres in the Lake District, like some of the wildest parts of the Lake District. And when I signed up for the challenge, I was just so excited about doing it. And it was just after COVID. We did it in 2021. So, we had to battle a number of things to training during COVID and all those sorts of things. We were training in London, which isn't great for the 8,500 metres of ascent that you need to do in the Lake District. But pressure is not something that I had considered in relation to this challenge. And ultimately, that was my downfall. So, long story short, 70 kilometres in, 30 out of the 42 fells and 5,500 metres I had to pull out. And looking back at it now, I was absolutely devastated. I trained so hard for this and I thought I had covered all boundaries and everything. And looking back at it now, I've just not considered pressure to even have been present because it was something that I was really excited about doing. And reflecting back on it, in the 24, 36 hours leading up to the start of it, my resting heart rate was like 80 beats per minute rather than the normal 50. I wasn't eating, or if I was trying to eat, I then just couldn't. I had this, it's funny talking about it now, I can feel it like in my stomach, like just this almost shortness of breath as well. Like, and I just couldn't eat, but I thought, oh, it's just excitement. I'll just crack on. And actually it wasn't until we started and we got out to the sort of wild, like wilderness of the fells that night, that the sort of that pressure just felt like it dropped. But it was too late by that stage, because then I was trying to eat and I found myself at 2 a.m. on the Helvellyn range, like licking a sweet potato because I just couldn't eat anything. So I was just like, right, God, I have to eat, like just licking. And I started having this feeling of like real heaviness in my legs, which I know is synonymous to just not having enough fuel. So, by the time I'd got to the top of Lord's Rake, gosh, I can't remember what time that would have been, but it was about 15 hours in at the top of Scarfell Pike, and I was dizzy. And I just thought, uh-oh. And my friend that I did it with, there was 2 of us doing it, and you've got to do it within 24 hours to complete the challenge. And we'd agreed beforehand, if one of us is dropping off that time, we have to make the call. Now, at that point, we were still like a good couple of hours ahead of our schedule, but I knew that for me, it was going to be a very rapid decline. And I also, in that moment, knew a few things. One, I was going to jeopardize his 24 hours, which, that for me, it was a massive thing for him. I was kind of secondary to it, joining him in it. And I thought, I don't want to ruin that for him. And also there was a number of navigators and people with us, and it was going to become dangerous for them if I'd lost control of myself. So I called it in that moment, because the next leg 4, is also really dangerous in terms of there's lots of ridge lines and you drop off. So I made that call in that moment, and I think the pressure almost then just fell off us, because I burst into tears, he burst into tears, and he was like, no, come on, we can do this. And I said, well, we can, but I'm going to ruin, the goal, number 1 goal was to make 24 hours, and I'm jeopardizing that for you. And it was devastating. Like, I was absolutely crushed for a week. Like, I barely spoke to anyone for a week, because I had trained so hard, but I just hadn't considered the impact of pressure. And that was ultimately like the downfall of this entire challenge. And it was funny, because the next day, the 24 hours after it finished, and Jamie completed it, which was incredible. And I went to Moot Hall in Keswick with everyone else, and we cheered him in, and I was so pleased for him. But the next day I was like walking around as though I'd not done anything, and he was, hobbling down the stairs. And I just think, gosh, I thought in that moment how amazing my body was. I'd still done 70 kilometers and 5,500 meters of ascent, and I felt like I'd done a park run, but I was crushed, because I just thought, God, I was so physically fit, but I'd overlooked what pressure could have done in that moment.
Yeah. That whole thing about excitement and nerves or pressure, or, the sort of body of attention an event like that gets, so for you, it was that. It could, for other people in their lives, it could be something else. But we're often taught to say, oh, it's just, it's not nerves, it's excitement. But actually what you're saying there beautifully, I think, is just watch out for that, because the excitement can overtake the sort of the sort of discipline and rigor of what actually is needed underneath that to be able to perform at our best in the way that we want. You know?
Absolutely. I think, and I know that I need pressure, or I need to have that feeling. I know that the stakes are high and things are going to get exciting. It's going to be an adventure when that's there. But I think the critical thing is, and the thing that I've learned from it, is that you also have to be in tune with your body to understand that it's there. And what are you going to do about it? Because I know in a number of different aspects of my life, I've recognized it when it's there. And it's the same now. I recognize when that feeling of, is it fear, is it excitement? But you've got to be in tune to feel that it's there, because if you don't, and I know if I don't, you can't then put the practices and the protocols in place to deal with it, to then make it useful for you. And, you know, with the Bob Graham leading up to it and afterwards, I worked and spoke a lot to Simon, who was phenomenal in terms of, you know, what's your self-talk? What's the narrative? How can you understand? How can you use breath work? But I'd missed a really critical step, which was recognizing and tuning into the fact that the pressure was there. And that for me was an absolute game changer, which is why, you know, it has been such a, you know, a poignant moment in my life and such a valuable lesson, because yes, it was just a 24-hour run on the fells, you know, it wasn't super high stakes, but the point is I'd committed so much time and dedication into training for it. But upon reflecting, it now makes me excited about going back and trying to do it again, you know, when the time is right and when I've got enough time to train for it, because it's just an adventure. It's something to lead into, to be curious, to be like, okay, well, what could I do if I, you know, knowing now what I do, how can I show up differently next time? But yeah, tuning into that pressure is critical.
Yeah, and tuning into you're talking about the fuel specifically, aren't you? Because your body was ready in terms of its ability to be able to do it, to run it, and to deal with the stress on the body. But the emotion had made you think that the eating were you just not nourished? Had you just not eaten enough?
I just hadn't. No, I hadn't eaten enough. I had in the day before, and it's interesting because I guess from a nutritional point of view, most of the carb, like had I been doing a 5-hour, you know, like a half Ironman race, I would have been fine. It would have been hard, but I would have had enough stores in my body to get through.
Yeah.
But I think in that crucial window, sort of 36 to 48 hours before starting, I'd not topped up anywhere near enough glycogen stores, and I'd just not got that food in. So even if I'd managed to do the carb load beforehand, the reality is I could have done that 24 hours without much food and been fine. But I hadn't done that beforehand, let alone when I was actually then expending the calories on the mountains. And of course, you know, in extreme survival situations, or if I'd continued, again, I would have finished, but I probably would have finished in like 25, 26, 27 hours and put my body under an extreme amount of pressure. But the goal was to finish under 24 and to do it together. And I was jeopardizing that, so we stopped. So again, it's also about weighing up in that moment, what's the most valuable thing to do? Because our bodies are incredible. And of course, you can keep going for 24 hours without any food.
Yeah.
But at that moment, the decision was not sensible to carry on.
And it also would have put you and potentially others in danger, as you said, which is, you know, and you were still thinking clearly enough to be able to make that choice.
Yeah.
As well. It also makes me think of things that we do when the pressure is impulsive. We had a horrific moment when the kids were tiny, or small, not tiny, young, in South Africa when Charlie was about 9, I think, and he was, or even less, was at the side in the sea, but like only up to about his ankles, I would say. And then slowly, I saw him going further and further. And he got caught in a riptide. And so it was absolute panic. And Chris just got up and just raced into the sea after him. And of course, then he got caught up in the riptide. So there was me and Matty, who was then about like 5. I found myself just running around in a mad panic circle, not knowing what to do, just basically screaming at both of them, feeling like I could lose 2 of these people that I dearly love in my life. And it wasn't until a surfer had noticed that Charlie was in trouble. Yeah. He scooped Charlie up, put him on a board, and basically shouted at Chris and said, "Go with the tide, just follow it, just go sideways, let it." And he got thrown up against rocks and everything and got cut up, but at least he didn't die. And I just thought in that was such a split-second moment, but the impulse was to go and rescue your child, right, without even thinking about, do I know what I'm doing at a riptide? What does a riptide actually tell us to do? You know, all of those things. So it's not exactly the same as you, but in the description of your race, but it's this whole emotional response that can take us over, and actually, instead of slowing us down to make some considered choices, off we go.
Yeah, because I think, the body's an incredible vessel and machine, and, it's where we inhabit on a daily basis. But your body's trying to tell you things all the time. There's these cues all the time, and that could be, your heart rate goes up, you feel a little bit hotter, you're struggling to breathe, your vision might go a little bit, or your thoughts then are racing. And I think just understanding what those different cues mean is so important when we're thinking about pressure, because back to that point around sort of nervousness and excitement. If you're going into a board presentation or a job interview, or a sort of a high, as you've perceived, a high stakes meeting or interview, understanding what that feeling is and being able to take the space and a minute to just stop and take a breath and smile to just settle that rate down. And it's the same, if you'd, in that scenario on the beach, that's very high stakes. But if you'd been able to just take a breath, you might have then been able to shout, go sideways, rather than get out. So it's really, I just think being in tune with what your body is doing and what it's telling you is just a game changer when it comes to pressure.
This deliberate tuning in that Mollie talks about, having ways to override any unhelpful urges and impulses in high moments of pressure, is key. Now, I know we're talking about high stake moments here, but studies in people who survive this kind of high stake pressure offers interesting insights around the importance of managing our mood and making a deliberate plan. The research shows that people who've survived extraordinary circumstances best spent very little time focusing on what had been lost or gone wrong. Instead, they deliberately focused on having some ways to survive. This sense of survival doesn't have to be as extreme as my example of watching my son being pulled under by a riptide. It could be, as Mollie said, a high-stakes presentation, or even a person who triggers in you an instinctive reaction or impulse that brings out your worst behaviour. We all have these people or situations in our lives. To interrupt the potentially disastrous urges and impulses, it's essential that we have some deliberate ways to do that before they take over, urging and impelling us to act in the immediate. Amanda Ripley's book, The Unthinkable, is a study of ordinary people who survived some of the world's most harrowing situations. Her research shows just how important it is to control inbuilt and instinctive reactions. We can, if we apply, and I quote, cautious deliberation and make good decisions. But what's important to remember is that the sequence in these situations is always the same. We respond physically first. Learn to notice what your physical signs are when you feel pressure before your faster instincts and intuitions take over and may not always be useful. Sabrina Cohen-Hatton, a chief fire officer in Sussex and a doctor in behavioural neuroscience, was also fascinated with controlling inbuilt and instinctive reactions in challenging rescue operations so that her team could make safe decisions fast under pressure. Her research explored the traps that lead to poor choices. Her own trap, she described, was overthinking. Well, I can certainly relate to that. To navigate this, she devised what she described as the decision control process, a fast way to evaluate a decision before implementing it. She found that the appropriate point to make an intervention is after you've made the decision, but before you implement that decision. She developed what they called decision control, a rapid mental check for key pressure moments in life or death situations. She would drill her firefighting team in moments of pressure before taking action to pause and run through these 3 questions. 1. What's your goal? 2. What do you expect to happen as a result of this action? And 3. How do the benefits outweigh the risks? When I first read this, I thought, blimey, that's incredible, to be in the midst of a potential life and death situation and be disciplined enough to pause for a few seconds to run through these questions. And then, of course, I remember that these habits are drilled. Yes, repeatedly drilled before a likely traumatic event, so that when the adrenaline is pumping through their system, they have a fast way to check and remind themselves that they are in control of their choices and their decisions. A fast tune-in and check. While you might not be dealing with life or death, high-stake pressure, where are the moments in your life that might benefit from your own personal choice control drill? a way of slowing yourself down for a few seconds to tune in and check before being unhelpfully bossed by your faster impulses and instinct. I love this sort of reframe also that you're doing around that race, to say, like, it would be so easy, wouldn't it, to say, I failed at that race.
Yeah. Yeah.
And instead, what I'm hearing from this conversation is you're saying there's so much I learned from that race, actually. And that's so much more empowering. And this is so, I think, interesting and vital what you're raising here, Mollie, is that we see when we're working with organizations, people like getting faster and faster because of the pressure or the uncertainty or the volatility and all the other things that are going on. And they do something and then they're on to the next thing, as opposed to just slowing down and thinking, right, what did we learn from that? Be it good or bad, useful or not useful. Like, what are we taking from it? And that's what I'm getting from the story that you've just been telling is, yeah, you could say I failed at that race. I let my partner down, or you didn't because you dropped out. But there's also many negative narratives you could run around that event, but you're choosing to not do that, which I love.
Yeah, I think the learning is the most important thing. What's this going to teach me? But of course, in that moment as well, and that comes back to the personal board of directors piece, right? Because in that moment, I was so hard on myself, and I was like, well, I've completely ruined that and I've failed. And actually, it was Simon said, don't associate the word failure with that, because it's not, it's not I don't like the word failure, I think he said, because it's not a fail. It's like, and there's so much it's given me from that moment, not least, like, it was a monumental challenge that I was like, yeah, cool, I'll give it a go. Even in that space, okay, great. What else does that then enable you to think, yeah, I can give it a go? Okay, well, what do I need to change next time? What can I learn and what's the worst that's going to happen? Like, that is the epitome of those two things, because it's just, there's so much richness in when things don't go the way you thought they had, because ultimately there were obstacles that you've had to overcome or deal with. And also it forces you to reflect and say, okay, well, what did I take from that? And how can I use that in other aspects of my life? Invaluable.
Do you do that specifically with your team as well, Mollie, now? Like, when you're working in, with a specific, what we would call critical impact opportunity or leadership opportunity, do you build that cohesively into the whole plan, the stop and review?
We definitely have like wash-ups.
Yes.
But it's definitely an area to be improved. Actually, I was talking with a friend at work about something the other day, and I was like, this isn't one for now, but let's add this to the agenda for our wash up. Like, there's something here that we can optimize as we go.
Yeah.
But it's a real discipline to say, to put that time in. And again, time will be put in for these wash ups, but actually, are they as good as they could be? Like, I definitely think there's room for improvement there, because you put the time in for the wash up, so it's in the diary, but then the reality is everybody's really high and excited from what's just happened. How do you sort of level that a bit and say, okay, great, this was good, this wasn't so good, what are we going to change next time? I think there's definitely room for improvement and add more discipline around that.
Yes, and also I think there's more discipline to put into really mining success too. Yeah. So what I notice is people have a triumph, and then they just race, and that, as you say, they bathe in that glory, which is great. We do need to celebrate. It's absolutely true. But also there's gold in there as well. Like, how did we do it? What was it that really allowed that to be so successful? And I think often wash-ups are associated with things that have gone wrong, as opposed to things that have gone really brilliantly.
Yeah, totally. And I think just not also in the success, okay, well, why was it successful, and how do we think we could transfer some of that success or the way that we operated into some other things that we're doing? And did we identify different partnerships? Did we work with different teams? Did we bring in different teams? Was there a different combination of personalities that worked together? Why do we think that worked? I think all of those sorts of questions of drilling into both the success and the learnings would be is super valuable. But as I'm sure everybody appreciates, you are working at 100 miles an hour. So people are like, well, that was great. Off we go. But actually,
next.
Yeah, next.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it takes a real discipline to slow down a little bit to notice those things. I also want to pick up on something you said in our briefing call, Mollie, around that time I don't know if you can talk about this, but that time you went for a job and you thought, actually, I'm going to break a few of what people are expecting of me. I'm going to break a few rules here, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do this interview in a slightly different way. I just feel this is relevant somehow, right? Because I think sometimes we put pressure comes up in many guises. And one of the ways that I think pressure really comes up, particularly for me, actually, is when I get caught up in what I think people are expecting of me in this situation. And what I loved about this story you shared is you thought, well, you knew there was an expectation and you decided to be brave and go, do you know what? No, I'm going to do it this way.
Yeah.
Are you happy to talk a bit about
of course. I was a sports student. I did sports science at university. My first job was in a sports marketing agency. And then I was going for a job at one of the biggest high street banks. And, I'm a creative individual. As a fresh-faced sort of early 20-something, I was going for this job, and it was a product marketing role for some very complex and not overly interesting European payments solution. And I'd been given a brief, and I was told to come in and present a marketing strategy and plan for how I would increase revenue at a local, I think it was Victoria Park, actually, like tourism venue. So I thought, okay, cool. So I was talking to my parents about it, read a few different, Googled a few different things, did a bit of research. And I thought, well, hang on a minute. They were expecting a presentation. It was on the 37th floor in one of the high-rise towers in Canary Wharf. And I thought, God, well, how can I do this differently? Because I do believe in difference, and actually that difference being so valuable. So long story short, I went to the local charity shop and I bought a board game which had a number of different characters on it. And it had, it had a river running down it, and it was almost like Snakes and Ladders, but with a bit more sort of flamboyance, I guess. And I used that board game to articulate what the marketing strategy would be. You could get additional customers coming up. They could, rather than just using the tube, they could come on this river and look, here's the river. And I had little animated characters that were on the thing. So, there's me. I walked in, everyone's suited and booted. They're like, oh, would you like to connect your laptop to the screen to present? I said, oh, no, I don't need that. Got out of my bag my board game, opened the box, put the board game out, and they were just sitting there, their drawers dropped to the floor. Like, what is this woman about to do? And it was exciting because I just saw their faces, and part of me was like, oh no. But then I thought, no, come on, you need to own this. Like, this is interesting. This is exciting. It captured their attention from the moment they saw the box. And I presented the entire presentation about the marketing strategy using the board game, and they were captivated. And I got the job. I then worked at that bank for 6 years, I think. And they spoke about it when I left. They spoke about that job interview, and they were like, that was one of the most creative, innovative, and the most memorable job interview that we've ever been in. So I think, there's a point of being different. There's a point of difference, and just thinking, okay, the pressure's going to be there anyway. How can I play with it, make it a bit more fun, and using a board game in a very serious interview, you're going into a creative space. So if people don't identify with that, it also speaks volumes to you of, how creative are they then, really?
Yeah. But that takes, as a 20-something-year-old, that takes a lot of guts, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Where have you got the sort of solid guts to do that? Where do you think that came from?
I think from a very young age, and actually here's a fairly funny story. So this is one of my earliest memories. I think I would have been 5. I was in reception, and I've always been very sort of outgoing and full of energy. And I had a friend at school called Catherine, and it was a Monday morning, and our reception teacher was called Mrs. Sanson. She was fierce. And Catherine had been to, we grew up in Kent, to Chislehurst Caves, and she'd got this little box of gems, and it was like a little clear box, and it had loads of little gems in it. And she was like, I really want to show these to the teacher. And she was too scared. So I said, well, come on. I held her hand. I was like, I'll come with you. So we went to Mrs. Sanson, and I went to say, Catherine wants to show you the gems. And this teacher it felt, my memory is she shouted at me, I can't remember, but she says, those like, go and sit down, they're not yours, stop being so bossy, those are Catherine's gems. And I was like, whoa, didn't really know how to process that. And I had wanted to help Catherine to, you know, just get the confidence, I guess, to show these gems. But in that moment, I'd been completely cut and shut down. But, and I think that was a continual theme through sort of school, that I was, you know, I was always distracted. I was doing things differently. I wasn't like, I didn't fit the mold, and I wasn't following the sort of process. But in my home life, my parents just saw it as kind of adventure and curiosity, and they really fostered it. So I think they created an environment for us where it was okay to be different, and actually like that, those levels of energy were fine. They just needed to be channeled in a completely different way. So I think for me, they foster, you know, having an environment with my parents and my brother that was fostering it was just crucial, because, you know, I'd continually been told, no, you're doing it wrong, that's not how we do it, as I was at school, which is why, you know, I just then didn't love school. I ended up, I think by the time I got to my A levels, I think my attendance was probably 50%, because I was like, well, this isn't giving me anything. Like, I'll pass my exams because that's easily done, but this isn't giving me anything. So I think it was an innate character trait, but it was one that was built and developed through my home environment, for sure.
Gosh, that's so interesting, because I spent the first 13 years of my career as a teacher, as you know. And we used to have this phrase, you know, you never really beat the home environment. And, you know, there's a plus and a negative to that, really. But I just get so disappointed when I can't tell you how many people I talk to, grown-ups, you know, like people in their 50s onwards who can remember one thing that a teacher said to them that either fired them into possibility or completely depleted their hunger or their confidence. You know, that could have gone two ways, that teacher's comment to you, couldn't it? That could have sort of made you think, I'm never going to do that again, or oh, I'm not obeying the rules, so therefore I'm not going to go to this big bank later down in my life with the, you know, with the courage to say I'm going to do it my way, because I'd been told it's not okay to do it my way. But because of your internal family support system, which was stronger than the school system, it didn't make a difference. It actually allowed you to blossom even further, right? I think that's such a great story.
From that moment on, almost, not consciously, because I don't think I became aware of the power of these different interactions and situations in life until a lot later. But like, that is why I then think, you know, personal board of directors now is just so crucial, because people to be your cheerleaders, but people to nudge you, people to challenge you, people to say, no, you've gone too far, to have that is just so powerful. Because, you know, mentors, sponsors, friends, loved ones, you know, as bad as that experience was, and I think that probably happens to a lot of people that think differently or have like insane levels of energy. You know, when I was then at my secondary school, I had a number of incredible teachers. I mean, one, Mrs. Eddy, who I'm still friends with on Facebook, like,
brilliant,
phenomenal woman, because she was our English teacher, and she obviously saw something in me that she was like, this just needs a bit of guidance. And, you know, it's then teachers like that are, you know, completely game changing. Because I think my geography teacher, Miss Moss, great geography teacher name, you know, there's people like that then have the power to transform your life and keep you on the rails enough to then go and let you flourish. And then once you go out of the school system, it's like, okay, well, where do you then get that from? And I think that's why it's so important for us to, you know, show up with that vulnerability, to allow enough people in and be honest about what you're trying to achieve, to go and do it, to feel like you have the support. Like, I never would have gone into that interview with a board game had I not run through that idea with a couple of people. Because some people that didn't know me would have been like, that is a ridiculous idea, do not do that, do a PowerPoint and get on with it. So,
but again, it depends who you talk to, doesn't it? That's why I think this is a really important message, right? Because you could have spoken to two other people that thought, you're going to go to a big bank and you can bring a part. Don't be stupid. That's complete suicide. But you must have instinctively chosen the people who you deeply respected and thought, actually, I need to run it by these people. And I think that is important, is to, sometimes we surround ourselves with people that maybe are not backing us in a brave way.
Yeah, I think so. And, you talk brilliantly about your sort of zone of excellence and your zone of genius. And I think being sort of vulnerable and brave enough to say, right, this is what I'm going after, and this is kind of the support I need. That's the difference between excellence and genius, because you need people to push you, but you also need that support network to say, yeah, you've got to dare to begin. Like, I spoke at Adweek a few years ago, and the topic of my keynote was dare to begin, because and actually it's interesting because I like the first slide is me in my Team GB triathlon kit, and then I started by saying, I hated PE at school, and everyone's like, what? And it's true, I did. I did, because the teachers are like, well, you're rubbish at netball, so therefore you're rubbish. So I didn't find sport until I left and went to university, when everyone was like, oh my God, you are so strong, so powerful, like you're going to be an incredible rower. And I was like, wow, I found this at 18.
Yeah.
But you've got to dare to begin, to put yourself in that first environment, literally take the first step.
Yes.
Because if I've not done the row, not been brave enough to say, right, I'm going to try rowing, I never would have started cycling or swimming or done triathlon or, done the Bob Graham, as I was describing earlier. Like, none of that would have happened, because at school, I was told that I wasn't good at sport because I couldn't play netball. And actually, that just became a joke amongst my friends at uni. I was then an honorary member of the netball team. I lived with a lot of them, and many of them are my best friends now.
Yes.
But they didn't judge me for not being able to play netball. They were like, you're a phenomenal athlete. You just can't catch particularly well. Catching a boat.
No, and I think, the message in here is that I'm really hearing is, when we're in a sort of transition phase, maybe going from excellence to genius, there's an update that needs to happen in the whole of your life.
Yeah.
Who's surrounding you? Are they people that are going to actually cheer you into, your brilliance? Maybe they got you so far, and maybe they're still in your life, but maybe there's a whole other section of people you need in your life, or there's a whole other section of environments you need to step into that you wouldn't have stepped into before. And I think it's really resonating for me as we're talking around just how important it is to get the whole environment around you supportive in the leap that you're about to take.
And ensure that everybody understands and respects what you're doing as well. Within my kind of circle, I'm notorious for going to bed at like 9:30, because especially at the moment, because I've got a race, an Ironman in 3 weeks' time. Work is very busy. There's lots of things going on outside of work, so that's really important. And we spoke before, but sleep is such a critical foundation. So okay, if that is number one, like, what else needs to be dialed down? But people also need to understand that. And I remember at school having a group of friends that were like, oh, you're so boring. No, sleep is really important to me, and it's a foundational thing. So people, are understanding that now, because it's the foundation to a number of much bigger goals. It's not she's boring and she's going to sleep. It's a foundation.
So relate to that. And your friends fall away if you're not going to stay up all night and get completely hammered. I know it. I mean, I cannot be a supporter of Shed and not honor it in my life. It's absolutely fundamental, and you've got to walk your talk, otherwise what's the point? Okay, I have to pause the conversation for a moment, because there is so much gold to pick out. There are two key questions I need to underline here. Who are you listening to, and how are you listening to? If I had the chance, one of the things I would say to my younger self is this: Sara, be aware of who you're listening to and what you do off the back of it. I'm sure we all have examples of people who've backed us and given us courage and the belief that we can achieve more than we think we can. And conversely, we can also remember and perhaps still have people in our life who consciously or unconsciously are holding us back, either through the questions they ask us, the tone in which they talk to us, or even the facial expressions they adopt. This is important, not so much around what they're doing, but more about why we choose to listen to them. I wasn't exaggerating when I said I work with many adults who quote something someone said to them years ago, and that comment still floating around, still being listened to on some level, still limiting who they can be and where they want to go. Who are the people in your life who raise your game, who cheer your bravery, who back you and support you? People who, as Mollie says, will help you dare to begin. Seek them out intentionally. And bubble wrap yourself when you're around the people who don't do those things. I like the bubble wrap metaphor. I can practically see their comments bouncing off me way into the distance. Now on to the second question. When those you lead, love or care for are sharing something that is brave and ambitious, that they're sharing with bold vulnerability, how are you listening? Your full attention can propel someone else's bravery. Your attention has the potential to increase negative pressure or alchemize that same pressure into a force for better. The way you listen is an active choice. I was listening to Esther Perel talking with Brené Brown recently, and she said something that made me sit up. She said, "Deep listening isn't about what happens to the person who is listening. It shapes what the person listening says. The listener shapes the speaker." Oh, I love this concept, that how we listen can actively shape what the speaker chooses to tell us. The one thing I'd add is that the way we listen can also shape what the speaker does. So, 3 questions to ponder before we carry on this conversation with Mollie. Who are you surrounding yourself with? Are you intentionally tapping into your cheerleaders, those who want you to shine and stretch and use pressure to grow? And who could you give more attention to actively shape their ambition? In terms of your personal life, Mollie, I'm interested to know, there's many conversations where we focus on one area of pressure or whatever, but I'm really interested in this sort of the tapestry of how, as we get into our zone of genius, I suppose, as we were talking about this. Thank you, Gay Hendricks, by the way. Anyone interested in the zone of genius comes from a brilliant book called The Big Leap. But this idea of going into a new phase or keep growing, I suppose, is to keep growing in all the areas of your life. There are so many different ingredients, aren't there, to juggle, to sort of decide actually what deserves attention. It's almost like turning the dial up on one and turning the dial up on the other. And you've talked about, your endurance sports, and you've talked about, work. And then there's, our personal lives, the things that, and I hate, as people who know me know that I hate the idea of work-life balance, because I think it's a constant dance. And I think balance is an unhelpful word sometimes, because we're really, like, you're focusing at the moment on an Ironman. So there's a tension that's going in a particular area. And that's your choice. But how would you say you dance? I'm going to use that word because it means a lot to me anyway, between these various different choices of where you pay attention.
Yeah, I think, and again, we spoke earlier about it, but it's about sort of tuning in to the different levels of pressure that are showing up in your life at the moment.
Yes.
Versus the goals of where you want to go. So, my partner and I are, we want to start a family, and I've spoken about it before, but unfortunately last year we had 2 late miscarriages. So I spent like 7 months of last year pregnant, essentially.
Wow.
At the same time as, wanting to progress my career. The training had definitely taken a back seat, because that, was not a requirement for healthy pregnancy journey, but work was still busy, life was still busy, you're still trying to progress. So I think, and at points you just think, my goodness, this is a lot on one human being, because, we show up to work and everybody's sort of walking around, but you're just seeing the outside and the tip of the iceberg of that human being. There is so much going on behind closed doors, which I think is why it's so important to foster an environment of openness, as much as people want to be open, to be there and service that human being. Because, in the same way that Shed service us from a day-to-day operating perspective, what you're going through and what you're experiencing, that human experience, is so important. So, for me, understanding where those pressures are, and again, leaning on my like personal board of directors and the people around me to help navigate that, because one person can't deal with it all. And I think as a woman wanting to start a family at a certain stage in my career, like I was looking at a graph the other day, and the sort of motherhood penalty, like that is a pressure for me, because I think, goodness, I want to progress in my career. I also want to have a family. I don't want to drop off a cliff in terms of my career, but that all plays a massive part. And I think there's requirements there on society, on corporates, and then on ourselves and our partners and our support network to actually openly address that and say, okay, what can we do and how can we help to just alleviate and share some of that pressure?
Yeah.
And don't get me, I've got some incredible male role models and supporters and my partner in my life that would literally do anything for me to help me, which I'm incredibly grateful for. But I'm still a woman and I'm still experiencing it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a level of pressure, or there's it's a massive cake mix of pressure there that you just there's too much flour and there's too many chocolate drops. You've got to just start talking about where do you want to focus your energy to offset some of that feeling of pressure, to make to make yourself enjoy the experience as much as possible as you go through it. Because I think the reality of wanting to have a family is not it's not the plain sailing journey, I think, that a number of, or the outside world would have you believe. And it's not spoken about that much. So as a woman experiencing that journey, that adds pressure, because you don't know, we went for our 12-week scan the first time round, not even a seed of doubt, because I'd been told up until that point 3 times by midwives that I was like incredibly healthy and incredibly low risk. So then you get blindsided with, we're really sorry, there's no heartbeat.
Yeah.
Like, whoa. And that then has completely changed the trajectory of where you thought you were going in my career. Like in my mind, I was like, right, baby's going to be born here, 9 months, at 9 months, baby born, maybe 6 to 9 months off, back at work, and it just, that then falls apart. So it gives you a level of perspective. But it's also a reality that we have to live with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Thank you for that honesty, Mollie. And how much of that do you bring into your team? I'm really interested in that. It's like you're going through all of that, and so many people, as you say, there's a human, the outlines walking through the organization, working through the organization, but we don't actually know what is truly going on inside that human unless they are prepared to share bits of it. How much of that do you choose to share? When does vulnerability become useful, and when is vulnerability actually not helpful?
I think it's useful. I mean, I openly shared it on Instagram as well, and then with my teammates that I work with, because I think it's important. The amount of women I spoke to afterwards, or that approached me after I shared it, made me realize actually it's so valuable to share, because lots of people were unsure how to deal with it, or like there was a level of shame that they felt, or they thought it was their fault. And actually just one olive branch of someone sharing it, that understanding in the suffering, I think, was really valuable to people. But it also gave a number of people, I think, a feeling of, God, I'm not alone in this, because we're not alone in any of these things. Like, the human experience is a collective, we're all on this planet, we're all very different, but we're all experiencing life at the same time. Yes, we're experiencing life differently, but we go through similar joys and, really quite hard and harrowing traumas. How we deal with them is different, but I think showing up with a bit of vulnerability to say, look, I've experienced that, just makes you more real and more human. And I think it's really important to understand that everybody is different and everybody wants to share differently. And some people don't, some people don't want to share anything, and that's fine. But they also might take a bit of solace knowing my story and knowing that actually I don't want to share, but that I know that that person's been through it, and there's a bit of relatability to that. And just on a practical level, I mean, for the amount of hospital appointments, I mean, the first one was we had a really traumatic time. So I was in and out of hospital for a long time.
Mm.
And I'm just not good at lying. So I couldn't say, I'm going to the dentist again. Be like, well, your teeth look the same with all those hospital dental appointments. Like I needed a lot. I needed time to be, I was happy working, I have to say. But I needed to be at home because I needed the comfort of home, or I needed to be closer to the hospital.
Yeah.
But practically sharing what I was going through, I think it also fosters a sense of empathy in a lot of people. Like, are you okay? Are you taking it? The amount of people that said to me, are you taking enough time? The amount of people that said, I'm really sorry to hear this. I experienced a similar thing. I would just say, take time, don't rush back. Like, again, it's a sense of a collective. And I think that sense of collective community in both the good and the bad is so powerful.
So powerful, and so increasingly essential, I think, at the moment. Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Mollie. This is such a rich conversation. So, Mollie, as we reflect on this conversation, what it's rare. I mean, a lot of the guests, when I speak to them, say, it's just so good to have one solid time to talk about one thing in a way, and what it means. But from this conversation, what's the thing you're left with?
Yeah, I think for me, it's interconnectedness. We like the term human experience for me just has so much weight and so much depth to it. And we are on this planet for a very short, relatively period of time, and we experience it. So we experience work, we experience home, we experience grief, we experience joy. We're experiencing all of that. We experience pressure, but unless we can sit for a minute and tune into what that feels like, I think we miss so much, and I think for me, that's why I am open and I do share, my human experience, like the good things, the things I've learned from, the sad things, because I think tuning into those and understanding that they're a part of your rich tapestry and your story, it's just so valuable, and it's empowering. It makes you realize, there's no judgment there. There's no shame in hiding things. And I think, I had an episode in my life that I ran away from, and that shame was debilitating, actually, and just ate away at me for so long. And dropping that, I mean, I remember speaking to my dad about it, and he said, when you deal with this, there will be a moment in your life where you feel lighter. And my dad's a psychologist, by the way, just for context, but you will feel lighter. And I have to say that lightness, when I dropped the shame and dealt with the trauma of 19, there is a lightness. And actually what that lightness has enabled me to do is go about my life and this human experience with just so much more joy. Expectation, joy over expectation is just kind of my motto for living now. And just, explore. I think back to Mollie in the bank interview.
Yes.
More of that, Yeah.
More of that.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you so much, Mollie.
Absolute pleasure. Delightful to talk to you. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Better Under Pressure with me, Sara Milne Rowe. If you enjoyed it, please do subscribe and let us know what you found useful or what you'd like to know more about. And don't forget, if you'd like to sign up for our fortnightly Pressure Points newsletter, where I summarise key points from each conversation, you can find a link at saramilnerowe.com. If you're interested in any of the practices mentioned, check out my book, The Shed Method. Alternatively, you can find us at Coaching Impact or me on LinkedIn and Instagram. Better Under Pressure was produced by the fab team at Smart Cookie Media. Thanks so much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.